This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Rabbi Glatstein, the last year before Pesach, not the Last Supper, and we only have a few nights until the Leil HaKadosh, Leil HaSkadesh HaChag, and as we prepare for the Seder, I want to make another announcement that the learning should be Le'iloi Nishmas Harav Shmuel Yoel Ben Yechiel Michel, sponsored by our good friend Yitzchak Gedalowitz in Maryland, and also we wish on this occasion his Neshama should have an Aliyah, and should be a Meilutz Yosher for the entire family, for Simchas Anachas, Ad B'Yas Goel Tzedek.
Amen.
Okay, so the Leil Seder evokes very warm feelings in our hearts and in our minds. There's almost something magical about the Seder night. The Kedusha, the holiness, it's tangible. The great painters have tried to capture on canvas the majesty of the Jewish family sitting around the table, and even Jews who are completely alienated from their culture, and they don't even know Shema Yisrael, but they do know Ma Nishtana Halayla Hazeh Mikol Halaylos. And that reminds me of the story of the Jewish Englishman who he was living in London, a great literary giant, and one day he received the word from the Minister of Protocol that the Queen of England was going to have him knighted. He was selected to become a knight, and he's going to be invited to a special procession where, when it comes his turn, he's going to kneel before the Queen. The Queen's going to stick out her royal scepter, tap him on the shoulder, and he has to invoke a special Latin phrase. So he's preparing the special Latin phrase. He's so honored. He can't wait. He's practicing. He knows with certainty that when he stands before the Queen, he's going to say that special Latin phrase with all the confidence in the world. Vayihi hayom, the great day comes, and his heart is racing. He's almost there. Now he's standing before the Queen, and he kneels down, and she sticks out the royal scepter. He's so nervous, he freezes. He forgot the special Latin phrase. What's he going to do? So he remembers out of the deep recesses of his heart, from his earliest childhood memory, he figures he's going to say something in a different language. Maybe he'll get it past the Queen. So as the Queen sticks out her royal scepter on his shoulder, he says, Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halaylos. The Queen is perplexed. She turns to the Minister of Protocol. Minister of Protocol says, why is this night different from all the other nights? Okay. Anyway, Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halaylos. This night, the night of Pesach, is very different from all the nights of the year. In fact, we perform more mitzvos the night of the Seder than any other night of the year. Exactly how many mitzvos do we perform? So, in the Haggadah we mention a number of times the pasuk, V'higadeta lebincha b'ayom hahu leimar ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeisi mitzrayim. That because of this, Hashem took me out of Mitzrayim. What's the zeh? What's the this? So the Abu Jaham writes in number 1, Abu Jaham, the great commentary on the Siddur, he says, what's the zeh? Zeh is the gematria 12. This is a reference to the 12 mitzvahs we perform Leil Seder. What are the 12 mitzvahs we perform Seder night? Number 1, the Dalet Koisos, that's 4. Number 5, Charoises. Number 6, Karpas. Number 7, we wash our hands twice, once before Karpas, once before Matzah. That's 7 and 8. Number 9, Hamoitzi. Number 10, Matzah. Number 11, Morar. And number 12, Koirech. And in the merit of these 12 mitzvahs, God took us out of Mitzrayim. Ba'avur zeh, because of zeh. That's an astounding thing. There is no other night of the year, there's no other time of the year that we perform so many mitzvahs. Daled minim is 1 mitzvah. Talis and tefillin is 2 mitzvahs. And yet the night of the Seder is designated for so many mitzvahs, 12 mitzvahs at one time. Comes the Chida, Reb Chaim Yosef David Azulai, and the Chida asks that the Abu Jaham left out the most important mitzvah. The mitzvah in the beginning of the pasuk, the Abu Jaham left out. V'higadeta lebincha b'yom hahu sipur yitzias Mitzrayim. The Abu Jaham forgot to count sipur yitzias Mitzrayim. That's number 13. Says the Chida, no, the Abu Jaham did not forget. The Abu Jaham was only counting mitzvahs masiyos, mitzvahs that you do with action. You eat matzah, you wash your hands. But Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim is not a maisa, it's not an act, it's dibur. Dibur is not a maisa. And therefore, the Avujam is only listing actions, but if you want to expand it to even diburim, then the list would be even larger. In fact, how large would it be? So we have here on the sheets, number 3, from a quote from Leil Shimurim of Rav Shlomo Brevda. Rav Shlomo Brevda was a Talmid Chacham who devoted his energies to writing on the Sfarim of the Vilna Gaon. And Rav Shlomo Brevda says he heard from a Rebbe, someone who's a Rebbe in the city of Mir in Poland, who heard from Rebbe Chanan Wasserman, Hashem Yimkom Damai, who had a tradition from the Vilna Gaon, that the night of the Seder, if you count not only mitzvahs maisiyos, if you count even mitzvahs that are diburim, you have 64 mitzvahs the night of the Seder. Namish hafla of a fella. If you count all the brachos and all the various components of the mitzvahs, we have a tradition from the Vilna Gaon. There are 64 mitzvahs the night of the Seder. Here you can imagine, you can have a guy, he comes into the Seder, he's in the red. You know, he's really, if he would take inventory of his stock, he would be majorly in the red. He has, let's say, 1,000 averos and only 950 mitzvahs. And he walks out of the Seder, he's a tzaddik, because he performs 64 mitzvahs. You know, you don't perform 64 mitzvahs any other day of the year. Not Rosh Hashanah, not Yom Kippur, 64 mitzvahs. And the question is, Rabbi Isai, Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halayla. Why has the night of Pesach been selected to perform so many mitzvahs? Okay, let's examine a little further. We go to number 4, the Radvaz, Rav David ben Zimra. The Radvaz was the Rav of Egypt. The Radvaz was the Rav of Egypt, and I want to tell you that at the age of 12, he was born in the year 1480. So at the age of 12, he was one of the Girushei Sfarad. He was exiled from Spain, and he makes his way to Tzvas, and then from there to Yerushalayim, and then finally he comes to Cairo, Egypt. Radvaz remains in Cairo for 40 years. He establishes a major yeshiva. Some of his Talmidim, the Arizal, Rabbi Tzalal Ashkenazi, the Shita Mekubetzes, these are all Talmidim of the Arizal, of the Radvaz. Radvaz made a number of very important takonos that are still in effect till today. In the times of the Rambam, 3 centuries before the Radvaz, the Rambam noticed that during Chazaras Hashatz, no, not what you're thinking. Not people were talking. No, that didn't happen. Not people were learning, which you can't do either. People were not listening carefully. So the Rambam went ahead and abolished Chazaras Hashatz. The Radvaz reinstituted Chazaras Hashatz. Radvaz had Gilui Eliyahu Hanavi. The Radvaz wrote over 2,400 tshuvos to the far-flung corners of the world. Radvaz wrote tshuvos to Salonika, Italy, to Africa. He even wrote a tshuva to India. Not about whether shaitels are avodah zarah or not, that was something else. But he wrote a tshuva to India. Okay? And the Radvaz is presented with the following question. Says the Radvaz, when it comes to this Isser of Chametz, the prohibition of Chametz, it's a very mysterious prohibition. First of all, everybody knows that a Jew cannot eat chazer. Yeah? Right? We're good with that? You can't eat chazer. You can't eat pig. And yet, the halacha is, if let's say, you sit down to a meal, and let's say you're like this, you're cooking a big pot of chicken soup, and someone's walking by with a cup of pig fat, and a little pig fat falls in the chicken soup. What do you do to the chicken soup? No? You eat it. You eat it. Why not? Because es gesund hate. It's batal b'shishim. In fact, according to the Bnei Yissac, it's a mitzvah dafka to eat it. You should eat it. You should eat it because you're matayar the klipos. Whatever. That's not for now. It's for a different time. But if it happened, according to the Bnei Yissac, it's like you could mark it. They would sell in the stores chicken soup that pig fell in. It's a big hit. It's even more holy than matzah. Matzah was always holy. Chicken soup with pig fat, it's a big Inyan. Bnei Yissac writes about it. But what if on Pesach you're cooking up a big chicken soup and a piece of bread, a little tiny crumb, falls into the chicken soup, and the chicken soup is the biggest chicken soup in the history of the world. It's the size of this room. What do you do to the chicken soup? You have to throw the whole thing out. Why? Chametz b'Pesach is aser b'mashahu. It's not batel b'shishim. It's not even batel b'elef. So could someone tell me why chametz is more chamer than chazer? Nobody will look at a chazer. Nobody will go near chazer. And chametz that the rest of the year you're eating while you're listening to a shiur. Can you imagine? And it's not that bad, obviously. And if it falls into your food on Pesach, the whole thing is aser. Another halacha, just to illustrate the point. You're sitting down to a meal, you're on a park bench, park table, and you're eating your kosher salami sandwich on one end of the table, and your friend, a guy, is eating his chazer treif sandwich on the other end of the table. Could a Jew eat kosher food at the same time on the same table with a guy who's eating treif? Absolutely, yes. Why not? Do you have to put on separate tablecloths? No. Does there have to be any reminder on the table? No. Why? Because you would never eat his food. You would never come to eat his food. You know you can't eat it. But maybe a piece of his food will fall into your food. Who cares? Batel b'shishim. That's the halacha. That's what the Shach writes in Yoreh Deos and Peiches of Katan Beis. However, Rabbi say, what if you're eating milchiks, egg and cheese on one end of the table, and your friend is eating salami on the other end of the table? Could you both eat at the table at the same time? No. Why? Because we're afraid that since his food is kosher and your food is kosher, you may forget and partake of his food. So what you need to do is, you need to either eat on a separate placemat, or you eat on a tablecloth, he doesn't, or put something on the table that would not ordinarily be there. You have to make a hecker. But when it comes to Pesach, you're eating your matzah sandwich on one end of the table, and there's a guy on the other end of the table eating chametz. Could you eat at the same table at the same time? No. Could you eat on a separate tablecloth? No. Could you put down a big poster that says on chametz, on Pesach, chametz is an Isser Kares? Will that help? No. You cannot eat at the same table as someone eating chametz. What if the table is 50 miles long, and you're eating matzah on one end of the table, and him 50 miles down in New Jersey is eating chametz? Could you eat? No. Because we're afraid a wind may come and blow a little crumb of chametz into your food, and then your food will become aser. So what's going on here? Chametz is more chamor than pig? Chametz is more chamor than milk and meat? Where even a hecker doesn't help? Why do we have so many restrictions when it comes to chametz? It's like we have this all-out assault against chametz. I'll give you another example. What happens if you you bought a house off a guy 10 years ago, and then you're in the basement and you're jumping on the couch, nobody's looking, don't worry, you're having fun, and all of a sudden a hamburger from McDonald's pops out. What do you do with that burger? Throw it out. Do you have to burn it in a bonfire? Streifas treif? There's no Indian of biur treif. But if you find a piece of bread on Pesach, you got to burn it. So what? Chametz is worse than treif? Treif you just put in the garbage. And chametz you have to burn? Ask another kash. Let's say you buy a house off a guy. So now when you buy the house, you have to get down on your hands and knees with a flashlight and a wooden spoon and start checking all the corners, and then take out your feather and scraping out the radiator. Maybe there's Burger King in the radiator. Do you have to do bedikas treif? There's no such thing as bedikas treif. You don't have to check your house for any treif. There's no halacha of bedika. There's no halacha of chayrin ustakin. And yet when it comes to chametz, before Pesach, it's not enough that you sold the chametz. It's not enough. You have to check every nook and cranny for chametz. What is this all-out assault against chametz? It's more chamor than milk and meat. It's more chamor than treif. In fact, the Chidah says there are 7 chumros of chametz that do not apply by any other isser in the Torah. Number 1, bedika. You have to search for chametz. By the way, the Chida you could find number 10. You have Bedika, you have to search for Chametz. Chayrin Ustakin, you have to look in the nooks and crannies in the corners. Number 3, you have to be Mevatel the Chametz, you have to render it ownerless. Number 4, Sreifa, you need to burn the Chametz. Number 5, it's Asr B'choshehu, it's not Batal B'shishim. Number 6, Bal Yeira, you're not allowed to see it. Number 7, Bal Yematzeh. And the question is, Ma nishtana ha'isur hazeh mikol ha'isurim shabbatayra. Why is Chametz so much more strict, so much more severe? So the Radvaz says, maybe the reason is because Chametz carries with it an isur kares. Somebody eats kazayas Chametz on Pesach, it carries with it a very severe penalty. So maybe that's why there's so many restrictions about Chametz. Says the Radvaz, that can't be the reason. There are other Isurim that carry with it Isser Kares. For example, Chelev. For example, Dam. And yet, you don't have to search your house for Dam. You don't have to search your house for Chelev. So then the Radvaz says, well, maybe the reason why it's so chamor is because since Chametz is Asr B'Hana, so we have to have so many safeguards. Says Radvaz, there are other Isurim that are Asr B'Hana. Klei HaKerem is Asr B'Hana. Shar HaNiskol is Asr B'Hana. Well, maybe the reason why we have to be so careful about it is because, look, after all, you partake of it the whole year. You're so used to eating it, so if you get anywhere near Chametz, we're afraid you may forget. So maybe that's why there's so many precautions when it comes to Chametz. Says the Radvaz, that's not the reason. Chadash, also, Chadash is not off limits the whole year, and yet there's no halacha that you have to burn Chadash in your house. And therefore the Radvaz sort of shrugs his shoulders, throws up his arm, and says, what in the world is pshat in the Isser of Chametz? Why is Chametz so severe? Comes the Radvaz. After rejecting every attempt to try to answer this question, the Radvaz gives the following answer. Says the Radvaz, the Gemara number 6. The Gemara says in Brachos Yudzayin Amud Aleph. Right? The Gemara is listing the various tefillos of the Amoraim that they would add to their Shemona Esrei. And the Amoraim would say like this. Rabbi Alexandri, after he finished davening, he would say, Ribono shel olam, Ribono ha'olamim, Galoi v'yadu alefanecha. It's revealed and known before you what? Sheritzaynenu la'asos ritzayncha. That deep down in the heart of every Jew, it is our will to do the will of God. We all want to learn properly. We all want to daven properly. We all want to have proper ben adam lachaveroi. Everybody wants to do the right thing. So he says, so why don't we? What's stopping us? Umima akev, says the Gemara, sa'or shebe'isa v'shibud malchiyos. The yeast in the dough, and we're subjugated by the goyim. Now shibud malchiyos is very simple. That we understand. We live in a society where the ideals and the attitudes are antithetical to the Torah, and all the ideas that we're bombarded with make us, confuse us, and make us forget what our principles are, and that takes us away from serving Hashem. But what does the Gemara mean, the yeast in the dough? Yeast in the dough takes us away from Hashem? What's the Gemara saying? That eating donuts and eating cookies and eating big challahs, so it takes away from Hashem. Why? Because Friday night, after eating so much challah, you could barely move. You're like in a semi-coma from eating so much food. Is that what the Gemara means? The yeast in the dough, all the cookies and cake, and after you eat a donut, it's like you're drunk. You shouldn't even be allowed to drive after that. All the sugar rush to your brain, you can't even think. I don't think there should be halacha. Like, don't ask a Rav a shayla after he ate all that sugar. Well, what does the Gemara mean? That sa'ar shebe'isa, that yeast in the dough takes you away from serving Hashem? So, Rashi says like this. Says Rashi, sa'ar shebe'isa, yetzer hara shel b'valvenu hichmitzanu. The evil inclination in our heart makes us go sour. That the yetzer hara is compared to yeast. Yeast is a metaphor for the yetzer hara. The yetzer hara, of course, the evil inclination. What does it do to us? It causes our heart to rise up, to puff up, to inflame our heart. It makes us want things. It makes us feel we deserve things. It makes us upset. It makes us angry. It makes us jealous. It inflames our heart. That's the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara is like yeast. Before yeast came along, it was a pashita matzah, a simple matzah. It has no big hasagas, no big desires. You could step on it, nobody cares. And then comes along the yeast, and the yeast takes the matzah into a big challah with the shiny challah. It's the tallest thing. It has this big smell. It makes you into a big shot. In other words, the Yetzer Hara makes a person into a big shot, and that's where Averos come from. In other words, says the Radvaz, you know why chametz is so chamor? Because chametz represent our mortal enemy, our bitter enemy. The classic work of Jewish philosophy, you take a look on the sheet, the Chovos Halevavos, number 9. Chovos Halevavos says, right, if I were to ask you, who's your biggest enemy? Your boss, your coworker, don't answer further than that. Right? Who's your biggest enemy? Says the Chovos Halevavos, V'hu sha'omar, ben Adam, roi lecha ladas, you should know, ki hasoine hagadol shayesh lecha ba'olam, hu yitzrecha. The biggest enemy that you have in this world is your Yetzer Hara. Every moment of the day, he's trying to get you to stumble, to slip, to make a mistake, to do an avera, to do a chet. Chovos Halevavos relates the story that there was a chassid, a tzaddik, and he encountered a group of soldiers who had returned from battle. And he asked the soldiers, where are you coming from? The soldiers said, we're returning from a war. And the tzaddik says, you're returning from the small war, and now you begin to face the great war. And they said, what's the great war? Milchemes HaYetzer, the war against the Yetzer Hara. And therefore, Rabbi Isai, the greatest enemy, the most poisonous, most invidious, most severe enemy in our life is the Yetzer Hara. And the Yetzer Hara is reflected and represented and symbolized by chametz. And that's why when it comes to chametz, there's a zero tolerance policy. Every crumb of Yetzer Hara is poison. You got to search for it. You got to look in the nooks and crannies. You can't see it. You can't find it. You can't own it. If you have to nullify it. You have to burn it, because Yetzer Hara is unacceptable even in the smallest amount. There can never be enough restrictions. Says the Chidah. You know how many chumros there are when it comes to chametz? You know how many restrictions there are? 7. Why 7? Remember what they are, Rabbi Isai? You have to search. Nooks and crannies, chaver nestakin, you can't see it, you can't find it, you have to mevatel it, it's aser b'choshu, and you have to burn it. You know why there's 7 chumras when it comes to chametz? Says the Chidah, because the Gemara in Sukkah says on Daf Nun Beis, how many names does the Yetzer Hara have? 7 names. The Yetzer Hara has 7 names. Now, by the way, what are the 7 names? The Gemara says that God calls the Yetzer Hara Ra. Moshe called him Orel. David called him Tameh. Shlomo called him a Soine. Yeshaya called him a Michshal. Yecheskel called him an Even. Yoel called him Tzifaini. What does it mean he has 7 names? That means Yetzer Hara has 7 main tactics to get you to do an Avera. First thing he tells you are, that guy insulted you? You're going to take that from him? Do you know who you are? And the Yetzer Hara puffs you up like you're the most important person in the world. Go get back at him. And then it comes time to daven. And the Yetzer Hara says, daven? Whoa, who do you think you are? You think you're such an important person? You're a nobody. What difference does it make if you daven or not? Hashem really needs you to. So sometimes he makes you into a Baal Gaiva. Sometimes he makes you into a nobody. There's 7 different tricks that the Yetzer Hara has. That's why he has 7 different names. The 7 names of the Yetzer Hara are reflected in the 7 prohibitions of chametz. Chametz is the embodiment of the Yetzer Hara, and there are 7 prohibitions of chametz corresponding to the 7 aspects of Yetzer Hara. So what we're learning, Rabbi Isai, is that the reason why chametz is so strict, it's stricter than chazer, It's stricter than Klei HaKerem. It's stricter than Dam. It's stricter than Chelev. It's worse than Chadash. It's worse than any Isser you can imagine. You know why? Because Chametz is the Yetzer Hara himself. Chametz is a representation of the evil inclination. But Rabbi said, here's the problem. The Radvaz has given us such a beautiful answer that we have a major question now. Because if Chametz is so bad and so horrendous and so disgusting, because it represents the Yetzer Hara, then why do we eat Chametz every single day of the year except for Pesach? Dam, which is not so bad, you can never eat. Chelev, which is not so bad, you can never eat. Chazer, you can never eat. None of the Yisrei you can ever eat. Klei HaKerem, it's not like you have Klei HaKerem day, one day on the calendar, where you could just, go all out on your Klei HaKerem. And if Chametz is so terrible, and that's why you have 7 Chumros, and you can't see it, you can't know about it, you can't even vatal it, you have to, right? People, they don't want to talk to the rabbi the whole year, but what they can do, they have to sell their Chametz, right? So they're forced to go sell the Chametz. Yeah, that's the way. All of a sudden you hear from that's the way it works. Chametz is worse than any. Nobody ever wants to sell the rabbi their chazer, right? Imagine someone came into the shul with a leash. Rabbi, I'm sorry to tell you, but I don't know what to do with it, so maybe you can help me out. Maybe you know a guy who wants to buy my chazer. There's no such thing as mechiras chazer. And yet when it comes to chametz, all of a sudden you have to burn it. You have people, Erev Pesach, they have like a blowtorch. Chametz is worse, and yet the whole year, all of a sudden, you're eating chametz all day and all night. What's the pshat? Here, Rabbi say, what you're about to learn is a fundamental understanding of Yetzias Mitzrayim. When we think about leaving Egypt and the whole Yom Tov of Pesach, what season did the Rebbeinu Shem take us out of Mitzrayim? So the Torah makes a special note. Hayoim atem yotzim b'chodesh ha'aviv. You're going out today in the spring. Could someone tell me why the Torah is like giving me this little weather report as an introduction? We have a before we leave. By the way, it's time, traffic and weather. The roads are clear, but you should know it's spring. Why is it important to know what the weather is when we leave Mitzrayim? Rabbi says spring comes right after the winter. In the winter, the leaves fall off the trees, the animals hibernate, the earth is covered in snow. The world could be considered in a state of misa. The world is, so to speak, dead. And then the spring comes, and everything comes alive. The trees bloom, the animals frolic, the world is reborn. The world is having a Leda, the world is being born. So too, Rabbi Isai, Klal Yisrael in Mitzrayim. They're languishing in Mitzrayim. They're wallowing in Mitzrayim. They descended to the 49th level of Tumah. Had they remained there for a moment longer, they would have fallen to the point of no return, the 50th level. They had a low morale. They had slave mentality. They were almost spiritually dead. They were almost emotionally dead. And then the Rebbeinu Shem comes to Moshe Rabbeinu. He says, Moshe, guess what? You see these people over here who have no confidence and no morale and no ruchnias? I have elected them to become the Am HaNivchar. They are going to be the chosen nation. Mamleches Kohanim Goy Kadosh. They're going to be a nation of kings. These guys, they're Oivdei Avodah Zarah. They have slave mentality. They're like workers who whatever you say, yes sir, yes sir. They're going to be kings. How's that going to happen? So Rebbeinu Shem sent my way special Haggadah. The name of this Haggadah is Haggadah Yad Mitzrayim, which you have a bunch of clips from. The Haggadah Yad Mitzrayim was written by Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Chaver. Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Chaver was called Pesh Shlishi, the third mouth. He was the third mouth from the Vilna Gaon. He was a Talmud of Rabbi Yisrael Mishkolov, who was, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Mishkolov, who was a Talmud of the Gaon. And he elaborates on many of the ideas of the Vilna Gaon. And he wrote an introduction to his Haggadah called Pesach Yad. And he brings an idea of the Arizal, which is a stunning idea, an amazing idea. And that is, what we're learning is that just like in the spring the world is born again, so too after being in the dark, dingy Mitzrayim, almost falling to the 50th level of Tumah, falling to the point of almost no return, Klal Yisrael, so to speak, was born in Mitzrayim. So, and the Arizal makes the following analogy. Mitzrayim was, so to speak, pregnant, nisaber with the Jewish people. And Yetzias Mitzrayim is likened to the birth, the Leida of Klal Yisrael. That's the idea. And then Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Chaver runs with the idea. Okay, listen to this. Why did Klal Yisrael have to be exiled to such a lowly, despicable place? Of all the countries in the world, Mitzrayim is always held up as an example of what you should not be like. It says, Kemase Eretz Mitzrayim Loi Tasu. The pasuk says, you know what Mitzrayim are like? Besar Chamoirim Besaram. They're a bunch of donkeys. Mitzrayim is called Ervas. It's a compliment, by the way. That's a good thing to say about them. You know what it says about Mitzrayim? They're Ervas Haaretz. You know, there are some lands are Eine Haaretz. There are psukim that say Tabor Haaretz. Mitzrayim is the Erva. It's the most disgusting place on earth. Hashem couldn't have found a better place to put the Jewish people for 210 years than the most disgusting place on earth. Says Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Chaver that Mitzrayim was, so to speak, the host mother of the Jewish people. But not just that, not the host mother. They were the womb for the Jewish people. And it's well known, biologically, that in order for an embryo to develop properly, it needs a dark, cramped place. So to speak, of all the parts of the human body, the embryo develops in a very dark place, a very cramped place. It's almost slimy. It's creepy in there. It's moss. So the Rebbe Shem was looking for the best womb for the Jewish people, and he couldn't find a more disgusting, moss place than Mitzrayim. They would serve this function of being the womb for the Jewish people. Now listen to this. Pregnancy has 3 trimesters. It has 3 trimesters. First trimester, you can't even tell the woman is pregnant. Even the mother-in-law doesn't know yet, right? She's looking carefully, but even she doesn't know yet. So too, the first trimester, the pregnancy of Mitzrayim, you look at the Jews of Mitzrayim, it's not recognizable that they're in Shibud. It's not recognizable they're enslaved. The Shvatim go down to Mitzrayim, B'derech Kavod. They're treated royally. If you would look at them, no one would say Mitzrayim is pregnant. No one would say there's a Shibud. It's not even recognizable. They weren't really subjugated. The only thing was they were Be'eretz Loi Lahem. Rabbi said then comes second trimester. Second trimester, you could hide it all you want, but the world knows. It's boilate. Things get a little bit more difficult for the mother. It's a little bit heavier. She doesn't feel as well. So too, the second trimester of the Jewish people in Mitzrayim was Vayakam Melech Chadash al Mitzrayim. All of a sudden, they forgot about Yosef, and they started giving us a hard time. They started to subjugate us. The Avdus began. It was obvious that they were in Galus. Okay? Now comes the third trimester. Third trimester, the mother is getting bigger. The baby is getting bigger. The mother could barely walk around. Everything hurts. Everything's painful. And the inexperienced mother thinks that the more painful it is, and the more difficult it is, the more this is never going to end. This is going to last forever. She thinks, how's this ever going to be resolved? But the experienced mother knows that the more painful the pregnancy is getting, the closer it is to the end. The more painful it gets, the stronger the labor pains, the more it's getting the body ready to let the baby out. It's preparing the body. It's opening up the wound. The stronger the labor pains, the more the wound is dissolving. The more it's opening up. So too, the third trimester of Mitzrayim is when Miriam was born. From the birth of Miriam until Yetzias Mitzrayim, anybody know how many years it was? 86, exactly. 86 years. 86 years. Begematria Kais. We have a whole shiur on that, but not tonight. 86, that was the third trimester. The third trimester. Klal Yisrael is wallowing, they're languishing. The Mitzrim tell the Jewish women, you're going to work even while you're expecting. You're going to work even while you're having labor pains. You're going to work even while you're delivering. And then you take your baby and you put it into the bricks, into the cement. Even mikir tizak. And the babies were stuffed into the cement and they were crying out from the walls. And the Jewish women were screaming and crying. And to Klal Yisrael looked, the stronger the shibud was becoming, the more intense, the more painful, the more this will last forever. There's no way we're getting out of here, but it was just the opposite. The more intense the shibud became, the sooner we were getting out. Because really we were supposed to be in Mitzrayim for how long? 430 years. Why did we get out early? Because we were doing overtime. It was more painful. Vayimaru es chayayim, the Vilna Gaon says, because it was so embittered. What's the chop on Vayimaru es chayayim? Everybody knows. Vayimaru es chayayim, kadma v'azla. The gematria of kadma v'azla is what? 190. Because of Vayimaru es chayayim, they were kadam v'azal, they left 190 years early. So even though it looked like the stronger the mitzvah were getting and the more the bondage was becoming more intense, the longer we would be there, the longer we would never get out. It was just the opposite. The harder it was getting, the sooner we were coming to freedom. These were the 3 trimesters of Mitzrayim. So Rabbi said what we're learning is, the 210 years of Mitzrayim was the pregnancy, and the night of Makas B'chayros was when, so to speak, the host mother sits down on the birthing stool and gets ready to push. Gets ready to push. And finally, from the first day of Pesach until finally Shvi Shel Pesach, Klal Yisrael is born. Take a look on your sheets. Number 15. We say in the Haggadah on the Pasuk, V'avarti b'eretz Mitzrayim b'layla hazeh, will pass through the land of Egypt on that night. V'hikesi kol b'char b'eretz Mitzrayim, I will smite every firstborn in Mitzrayim. U'v'chol Elohei Mitzrayim nasa shvatim, and in all the gods of Egypt I will make shvatim. Ani Hashem, I am God. The Haggadah darshans, I will pass through the land of Egypt, I am not an angel. I will hit the B'chayrim, I am not a fiery angel. I will smite all the gods of Egypt, I am not an agent. Ani Hashem, ani hu v'layacher. And the question is, every boss knows you can't do everything yourself. A good boss knows how to delegate. And God delegates things to malachim. There are millions of malachim out there, Gabriel, Michael, Raphael, Nuriel, all kinds of names that I can't even pronounce, of different malachim. Reuben Margos wrote a whole sefer, Shemois Malachi Ashares. So why did the Rebbeinu Shalom have to take us out of Mitzrayim himself? Why couldn't he make a malach? Well, it would be too hard for a malach. Why? What's the inyan? Why ani? What's the emphasis? I. Says Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Chaver, unbelievable. The Gemara says in Tainus, there are 3 keys that Rebbeinu Shalom maintains sole possession of. There are 3 keys God doesn't give to an agent. The key of rain, only God knows when it's going to rain. You hear on the weather report, tomorrow, 3 to 4 inches of rain. Yeah, everybody knows, yeah, right. 50-50 whether you even need an umbrella. Right? Why? Because only God can make it rain. They could predict, they could look on the satellites with the different colors and make you think that they know what they're talking about. They don't know. Only God knows if it's going to rain. The key, the Gemara says, of Tchias HaMesim, only God will revive the dead. When God unlocks the grave and you wake up, you're going to see Hashem. It's not going to be any malach. Only the Rebbeinu Shalom can bring Tchias HaMesim. And then there's another key that God maintains sole possession of, and that is the key of childbirth. That key belongs to only God. No doctor knows yes, and no doctor knows no. Only it's a gift that comes straight from God. Rebbeinu Shalom says, this is my gift. That's such a special opportunity, because for this, you go straight to Hashem. Everything you go straight to Hashem. But this is a special matana. Nobody could tell a person it's impossible. Nobody could tell a person it's not unlikely. It's in God's hand. God gives it whenever He wants. Says Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Chaver, Yetzias Mitzrayim was the birth of the Jewish people. That's why it's V'avarti ani v'loy malach v'hikesi ani v'loy saraf v'chav ani v'loy shliach. It's birth, says Rebbe Shem. That's my key. That's on my keychain. I don't give it to anybody else. No malachim involved in this one. This is the birth of a child. Says Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Chaver, Oyom v'noira. Why was the first Makkah dam? Because the Gemara says in Nida, Ein psichas hakever v'loy dam. That as soon as the womb opens up, the first symptom is blood. So Mitzrayim was getting ready to give birth. What's the first symptom? Dam. Ein psichas hakever v'loy dam. Says Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Chaver. This is unbelievable. It says by Makas B'chayra, it's looking number 18. V'hoisa tza'aka gedoyla b'chayra. Sometime there was a scream in Mitzrayim. Asher kamayu loy niyasa. Never was there such a scream. V'chamayu loy soisif. Never will there be again in history a scream like this. Why is the Torah making a point that this was like the biggest scream in history? Who cares? And let's say when like a certain team won, they scream louder. Then they're like, who cares? Why does this have to be the biggest scream in history? It says Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Chaver. Who screams louder than anybody else? A woman who's giving birth. And that's if even she's giving birth to a small baby, let's say a 5-pound baby, she's still screaming her head off. And what if it's a big baby? What if it's a 10-pounder? Woo! That's going to be a loud scream. And what if it's a 15-pound? And what if she's having twins? Oy vey, watch out. And what if she's having quadruplets? You got to knock her out for that, right? And what if she's giving birth to an entire nation? Oy hanisa loikim lavoi lakachas loigoy nikarav goy. Mitzrayim is giving birth to 3 million Jews. And then when a Jew comes out, he's not saying, okay, excuse me, please. He's coming out. That's why the greatest scream in history was the night that Mitzrayim gave birth to Klal Yisrael. Asher kamayu loy niyasa v'chamayu loy soisif. Because that was the biggest, in the Guinness Book of World Records. What's the most amount of, embryos that came out at once? Yetzias Mitzrayim. And that's why it was the loudest scream. Okay. So Rabbi say, when a baby is born, the moment of birth is very critical. The baby is very sensitive. There's certain activities that have to be performed. Otherwise, the child will be in sakana. Right? The Gemara in Shabbos says you need to cut the umbilical cord. You have to suction out the lungs. You need to put drops in the eyes. The Gemara in Shabbos, Kuf Chav Tes Amud Aleph, enumerates 7 activities that must be done to the child when he's born. And you're allowed to be Mechalo Shabbos to perform these activities. You could wash the child in hot water. You could lotion the child. You could swaddle the child. Says Rav Shimshon Pinkus, the night of Pesach is the Leida of Klal Yisrael. That's when we were born. That is why the night of Pesach, there are a lot of activities that must be done. Kadesh, Orchatz, Karpas. How many? We have 12 mitzvahs. We have 64 mitzvahs total. Why so many mitzvahs tonight to say there? Because the child, we were just born. We got to wash out our eyes. We have to wash off our hair. We have to take a swaddle. All the activities, it's analogous to all the different procedures you do to a child. Right? As soon as a child is born, they grab him off. You have like 5 seconds, and they take it off, and they give vaccinations, right? All kinds of treatments, all kinds of drops, all kinds of washings. Why? Child is very sensitive. The first moments of life are critical for the rest of the child's life. Whatever you do, the moment the child is born, sets the tone for the child for the rest of its life. That's why the night of the Seder, that's the night we were born. Every activity is legislated. Every activity is a mitzvah. Everything has to be perfect. Because whatever we do the night of the Seder, the same way, whatever we do to a child when it's born is giving it health for the rest of its life. Whatever we do the night of the Seder is giving us spiritual health for the whole year. So I just found this year, this is an idea that we've mentioned in the past, I just found this year, in number 27, from the Avnei Nezar of Sachachav. He says a beautiful idea. It's the same thing with chametz. When you have a baby, The baby at first nurses from the mother, and if it has a bottle, it has to be sterilized. And chas v'shalom, if anyone looks at the bottle wrong, the mother goes to sterilize it. And if the mother leaves it out for 3 minutes, the mother goes to sterilize it. Because when a child is born, everything has to be perfect. And then the child gets a little older, and the bottle falls in the mud, you just quickly wash it off. Or if it falls on the floor, 3-second rule, right? No, nobody saw anything. In my house, you could lick off the floors, all those kinds of things. Nobody cares anymore, right? Imagine when you're 5-year-old kid, when it falls on the floor, you blow it off. So instead of there being dirt, now there are like millions of bacteria all over his food. But it doesn't matter. Because once the kid matures, he has a mature immune system, his body is able to handle the impurity. But after birth, the first few days, all the food has to be perfectly clean, perfectly sterile. Says the Avnei Nezer, also Rav Shimshon Pinkus, it's the same thing with chametz. The rest of the year, a little Yetzer Hara is not going to hurt anybody. You need a little Yetzer Hara. Remember, my grandfather told me, my mother's father told me, that when he was growing up in America, in RJJ, like in the 30s, so he had a mashgiach from Europe, Rabbi Zadel Epstein, who later became mashgiach in Torah by Rav Steinberg's yeshiva. When I was a bacher, when he was in his 90s, I went to visit him. So my grandfather had him like 85 years before that. And my grandfather used to tell the bacherim, a bacher needs to play ball. Why? Because you can't starve a Yetzer Hara. Yetzer Hara is there. You got to give something to the Yetzer Hara. You can't make believe that you're just gonna. You have to give something to the Yetzer Hara. That was 85 years ago. Kavachomer today. But a little Yetzer Hara, everybody needs a little Yetzer Hara. If without a Yetzer Hara, then nobody would do anything in this world. The Gemara even says that the Anshe Knesset Hagdola, when they daven to abolish the desire for idolatry, and God acceded to their request, so then they said, while we're at it already, let's daven to abolish the desire for arayos. So they davened for that, and like the whole world fell apart. The Gemara in Yuma says, the chickens stopped laying eggs. Everyone needs a little Yetzer Hara. So the rest of the year, you have a little cake, some challah, some cookies, not going to kill anybody. Don't have too much, but a little chametz is not going to hurt anybody. But that's during the rest of the year. But on Pesach is when we were born. And when you're born, the moment of birth, the food has to be completely sterile, completely pure. There can't be any Yetzer Hara. There can't be any evil inclination. The moment of birth is critical. The moment of birth, everything matters. Chas v'shalom, we don't have the immunity yet from the Yetzer Hara. The rest of the year, we could deal with the Yetzer Hara. We're more mature. We've developed. You could deal with a little impurity. But the moment of the birth on Pesach, our systems have not developed yet. Every ounce, every crumb of Yetzer Hara is dangerous. Rabbi Issac, listen to this. Fasten your seatbelts. Says Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Chaver. The word chametz and the word matzah have basically the same letters. They both have a mem. They both have a tzaddik. The only difference between chametz and matzah is that chametz is a ches and matzah is a hay. What's the difference between a ches and a hay? A ches, the hay has a little opening, a little hole, and the ches is completely closed up. Says Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Chaver. While we were still in Mitzrayim, we had ches. Ches is, we were closed in. The womb was closed. There was no escape hatch. But the night of Yetzias Mitzrayim, God took the womb and opened it a little crack and made it into a hay. And that's the Pesach Haleda. That's the hole we came out of. And that is why you cannot eat chametz abev yichos on Pesach. You're going to be trapped in Mitzrayim. The hay of matzah is the Pesach Haleda. That's the opening of the hole. That's how we came out. That's the hole we were born out of. We were born out of matzah. That's the Pesach Haleda. Many Sfarim bring down the following idea. The Arizal, Sasemes, Rav Tzadok, Naim Elimelech, Rav Hutner, they all bring down. Pesach is a compound word. What does it stand for? Pesach, the mouth that talks. What does that mean? So, there's an idea that Arizal says, somehow in Mitzrayim, not only were we enslaved, our faculty of speech was enslaved. Our koyach hadibur was enslaved. Whatever that means. That's why Para is a bad guy. Pera is a bad mouth. And when we're going free, where do we go free? Pi hachiros, the mouth of freedom. Somehow in Mitzrayim, our mouths were enslaved, and when we were let free, our mouths were liberated. And that's why the night of Pesach we try to elevate our mouth with the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, with the mitzvah of Achilas Matzah. Now certainly the ideas of the Arizal are beyond us, but based on everything we learned so far tonight, the Arizal is beautiful. You know what it means that our mouths were enslaved, and when we left Mitzrayim, our mouths were liberated. We all know the Gemara Nidan Daf Lamed Amud Beis. The Gemara says, "Lema havla doime b'mei imay." What is a child compared to in his mother's womb? Roishay munach loy bein birkav. The head of the child, his head is placed down between his knees. Upiv sosum. His mouth is sealed, says the Gemara. So in Mitzrayim, when we were in Mitzrayim and we were sort of incubated and we were an embryo, our mouth was sealed shut. Our koyach hadibur was sealed, like a child, b'mei imay. And when we're born, what does the Gemara say when a child is born? V'kivan sheyatza la'avir ha'olam niftach hasasum. The first thing that a kid does when he's born, his mouth opens. Pi achiros. Our mouths are liberated. That's why we elevate it with Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. By the way, if you look in Kapitel Kuf Lamed Vav of Tehillim, which talks about Yitzias Mitzrayim, it talks about Laila Kayom Yair. I found a remez to this idea, Laila Kayom Yair, what right after it says, Tisukeni bevet animi. God, you protected me in my mother's womb. What? Kuf Lamed Tes? This very fine gentleman says Kuf Lamed Tes. If it's in Kuf Lamed Tes, then I stand corrected. Thank you. We'll take a look. But it says, Tisukeni beveten imi. Rabbi Issac, what does this mean? What does it mean that in Mitzrayim we were born? We were born, we're standing in the same house, we're standing there, we're sitting in the same place. It's not like we came out of any... What's the meaning of this? How do we understand this? What is the symbolism of the fact that Yitzias Mitzrayim was the birth of the Jewish people? What it means is that Yitzias Mitzrayim marked the beginning of Klal Yisrael as an Am Hashem, as a nation who serves Hashem. It sort of inaugurated our nation in its national pastime that we have now been created to serve the Rebbe Hashem. This is the Chinuch. This is the Chanukah. This is the inauguration of a nation as Oivdei Hashem. The question, back to the Manishtana, not the night in England. Right? Why is this night, the Laila, why is this night different from all other nights? The Abarbanel learns that the question is like this. It's a deep question. Question is, presumably, a carbon Pesach is what kind of carbon? Carbon Taida. A carbon of thanksgiving. After all, the Jewish people qualified for all four categories of those who have to bring a carbon Taida. They were let out of jail. They were healed from sickness. They crossed the sea. They crossed the desert. Presumably, the carbon Pesach is a form of a carbon Taida. But the question is, a carbon Taida, you bring two types of loaves with it. You have to bring chametz loaves, and you have to bring matzah loaves. The carbon Pesach, you can't bring chametz loaves, you only bring matzah. Why is this carbon Taida different from all other carbon Taidas? That's what the Abari, you can look, the Chassam Sofer quotes in number 28. Why, when it comes to the carbon Taida of Pesach, is it only matzah, and the carbon Taida all the rest of the year is chametz u'matzah? So the Chassam Sofer says, that's such a good question. So what's the answer? Great question. Barbanel, you read into the Manishtana, right? Like, we sit down to Seder. Why on Pesach do we eat chametz and the rest of your matzah and the rest of your chametz? Good morning America. What do you mean? Because Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. What kind of question is that? So now that Barbanel learns it's a lamda shakasha, why is this carbon taida different from every other carbon taida? But what's the bottom line? What's the answer? So says Chassam Sofer, the answer is carbon Pesach is not a carbon taida. You know what it is? There's only one carbon that you only bring matzah with it. And that is the carbon that we learn about right after Pesach, Parsha Shmini. The carbon hamiluim. The carbon that inaugurates the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Mishkan. The carbon Pesach is a carbon miluim. It's a carbon of inauguration. What are we inaugurating? The fact that we were born on Pesach as a nation of Oivdei Hashem. And therefore Pesach is a time of great renewal, great hischadshus. Every person, when it comes Pesach, should say, whatever was has no bearing on what will be. It's a rejuvenation. Whatever your habits were, whatever you're involved in, that was then. Pesach comes, it's a leida. It's a new beginning. It's a new beginning of Avodas Hashem. The carbon Pesach is not a carbon toida. It's a carbon miluim. You're inaugurating a new era of Avodas Hashem. And in fact, I saw in the Haggadah of Rabbi Avram Shor, Halakach V'Halibov, that the Gemara tells us that when Moshe Rabbeinu, during the miluim, who presided as the acting Kohen Gadol? Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Gemara in Tainus asks, what did Moshe Rabbeinu wear when he was the practicing Kohen Gadol? He didn't wear the Big Day Kahuna. So the Gemara says that he wore Chaluk Lavan Shein Ba Imra, a white garment that has no hem. What white garment do we wear that has no hem? A kittel. That's the meaning of a kittel. A kittel is like the white garment of Moshe Rabbeinu that he wore during the Miluim. Because Pesach is a time of the birth of Klal Yisrael. It's a time of rejuvenation, a time of hischadshus, a time where we re-energize ourselves. Whatever it was, it doesn't matter. Now, starting now, right? We mentioned this past week that beginning 30 days before Pesach, slowly, the Rebbeinu Shalom starts taking away the forces of Tumah until by the night of Pesach, all Tumah has been removed. And we stand before the Rebbeinu Shalom without any Yetzer Hara, completely pure, like a newborn child. And all our food over Pesach is sterile from the Yetzer Hara, completely pure. It's a new era, it's a new beginning, it's a new hischadshus. And in fact, the Meiser Rekach brings down that we have a tradition that the third Beis HaMikdash will be built on Pesach. But the problem is, we won't be able to be mechanech it, we won't be able to inaugurate it, because there's a rule, in ma'arvin simcha b'simcha, you can't mix the simcha of inaugurating the Beis HaMikdash with the simcha of Pesach. And therefore he says, the chinuch for the third Beis HaMikdash will take place in the 7 remaining days of Nisan, completing the entire month as days of Kedusha. And therefore we're mispal, the Rebbeinu Shalom should give us siyata d'shmaya that we should all be mechadesh ourselves. We should, first of all, now that you know that you're being born again on Pesach, let me be the first to wish you mazel tov on your upcoming birth. And we should all use the opportunity to energize ourselves, to rejuvenate ourselves, and that's a chus. We should be zoichet to be mechanech, the third Beis HaMikdash. Amen. Thank you for coming.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.